Spider-Man No Way Home has finally hit theaters. After over a year of rumors, leaks, trailers, speculation, we finally have the movie, and we can talk spoilers. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your spoiler-filled thoughts on Spider-Man No Way Home. As this is a spoiler review, feel free to spoil away down below in the comments. No need for a spoiler warning. They've already been warned by the title and the thumbnail of this video and the words that I'm saying right now. As we go into this is much more kind of free-form podcast-style discussion of the film. And it's going to be topically based, so you can skip ahead to whichever topic you want me to talk about down below in the comment section. If there's something you want to skip, you can do so, though it'll mildly hurt my feelings. And if there's something you're really excited about, you can find it down below right there. With that said, let's get started talking about my general thoughts on the film. If you haven't checked out my spoiler-free review, I'll just real quickly give my spoiler-free general impressions of the film. And simply put, I would agree with my buddy Griffin, who said it's like the tale of two halves, which is to say the second half of this movie is so good that you kind of forget that the first half isn't nearly as good as the second half. And what I mean by that is the setup for the movie I thought was a little bit weak, a little bit cheap in the way they set it up. The first part where they're just hunting down villains was like, this is fun. It's got some nostalgia. There's some amusing bits, but it's like, it's okay. It's good enough. The second half, when things really get into motion, the urgency, the stakes start getting cranked up, more and more people start showing up. That's where the movie, it just knocks it out of the park of hitting all the right notes and delivering all the moments that I wanted. And so I just left the theater so excited about this movie, wanting to watch it again, wanting to drag as many people to go see it. But at the same time, I thought the first half could have been a lot better. They could have found a better way to set things up, spent more time on that, but clearly they spent all their time on all the payoff of everything rather than the setup. That's my general impressions about it, and I'll elaborate on all of that as we go into this. From there, let's dive into the audience reactions to this film opening night. So I saw it a day before it came out at a press screening, and even at my press screening, it was all critics. You couldn't bring a guest, no general public. This was critics-only screening, and people started clapping and applauding at all the moments. Doc Ock first shows, hello, Peter. Be like, yeah, you could hear a little bit of it. But then when that portal opens and you see a Spider-Man and you're like, that's not Tom Holland. You could hear the room go, oh. And then when he takes the mask off, people going like, at a critic screening, they were doing that. And then I went to go see it a second time opening night. I was more excited to see it the second time because I just knew the room was going to be nuts. And I saw it at the best theater at one of the biggest, saw it at the best screen at one of the bigger theaters in the area, packed room. And I had kind of publicly said where I was going to see the movie to try and maybe do a mini fan meetup. And so kind of a bunch of my fans were there at it and met a bunch of people, wonderful people, talked with them a little bit, took some pictures. And but in our theater, that's the wildest theater I've ever been in. Even more so than when I saw Endgame. I didn't see Endgame as good of a theater or as big of a screen, but it was a nice one. This was opening night, best theater in kind of the area. People were going wild. And then after the movie, with kind of the fans and everything, I kind of recorded their reaction. So real quick, I kind of wanted to share. Here's what the people I saw the movie with had to say about the movie and the experience. We just got out of seeing Spider-Man No Way Home. What'd you think about the movie?
Man, 10 out of 10. As a comic book fan, I know a lot. They did a lot right in this movie.
It was more than a treat, it was a feast.
It was a movie that I feel like promised a lot and delivered on everything that it promised.
I was really pleasantly surprised. I thought it was super wild. They did a whole lot of stuff, and they did it all really well.
I thought the movie was pretty good. It didn't do like the Spider-Man 3 syndrome, to be honest.
So it balanced having a lot of villains really well.
Yeah, definitely. And also it was a lot more somber than I thought it was going to be.
Good. Amazing.
Amazing.
Good plus best equals amazing.
Good plus best equals amazing.
Yes.
All right.
This movie was a perfect mix of different stories going on and different emotions, and it was perfectly balanced. I don't even know what to say. I thought it was incredible. If you can go see it in theaters, go see it in theaters. It's truly an experience.
Don't know if you can tell, my voice is gone from how hype it was. I don't want to give away too much. You got to watch it in theaters. It's the best experience you could ever go with.
I don't think I've ever had an audience that amped up the whole movie.
I know, my voice is gone. I was clapping, screaming. Yeah, my voice is.
People were hopping up and down.
It was so crazy in there. Like literally, like everyone was standing up and screaming.
Yeah.
Like in certain moments, like he's saying goosebumps to like my
Right.
skin. Like it was crazy. Yeah.
There's a bunch of parts where people are like, whoa, that was awesome. Like I've never seen that happen in 7 years.
Which is your entire life.
Yes.
I ain't got to say much. All you need to know is second favorite movie of all time. Superhero movie, definitely probably number 2. You know, Endgame, Infinity War got to be first. I'm sorry.
I thought it was great.
I feel like it may have dragged a little bit towards the beginning of the second act, but as it all came together, it came together so beautifully, and it was like a perfect Spider-Man movie.
Perfection.
So that was a pretty cool little deal. It was just great to get to see people. It was great to watch a movie with some of my fans and get to experience something special with them. And as it turns out, this is just such a crowd pleaser of a movie that was just a great time. And I hope to do more events like that in the near future and hopefully do a little bit of traveling to some other places and hopefully do this once again. From there, let's get started walking through the movie. But so our story kicks off with Peter, MJ, discovering this while they're out in the open and trying to like run from all the fame and everything. And he's got to get this quick kind of montage of everything that plays out from this. And some of it's little fun, little catch-ups on Aunt May and Happy are in the middle of their breakup as Peter comes home with this information. And then Aunt May walks in with Peter with his shirt off with MJ there and thinks that maybe they're up to the funny business in the bedroom. But while at the same time, she's glad to meet MJ and talk with her a little bit. So just like a lot of nice little light moments at this beginning part while moving the plot forward very quickly. And there's the quick little police investigation of these people like looking into him. And then you get this one scene that we kind of knew was going to be in there, kind of didn't, that Peter meets with his lawyer. And his lawyer is Matt Murdock, Daredevil, played by Charlie Cox from the Marvel Netflix shows. If you're new to my channel, Daredevil might have been my favorite show from the last decade. I just loved that show. And I saw No Way Home on Wednesday, which is when the new episode of Hawkeye dropped. So if you haven't seen that, just in case, I won't go too many specifics into that, but let's just say it was a great day for me. Like, they're doing it. This is really happening. It is a twofer for me when that happened. But so there had been some leaked images that I knew kind of generally what was in them, but I didn't actually see them. So I still haven't seen them. So I'm not sure if it was a clip from this scene, which it would have been if it was a real leak. But man, he's actually there. He's actually in it. And they've locked them in some sense as canon in the MCU. And even though it's a short scene, it's only a cameo. He's not in action, but you get just a little bit of him catching a rock being thrown through the window. It's just so satisfying to just him be there and give us a flavor for it. And my guess is that this was a reshoot. This was added very late in the process. He was actually, Charlie Cox was supposed to come out here to Texas for San Antonio Fan Fest, and he canceled like a week or two before the event because of scheduling, filming issues. Right as No Way Home was known to be doing reshoots. So I think that they shot that just a few months back and added it in because it's like you can take that out of the movie and the movie plays fine. And so I think they just were, who's everyone that we can lock in? Does it make sense to do this? All right, boom, let's capture that. And they threw a scene in there that was so fun. And that's even at the critic screening, another one where people are like, oh man, they're really making this happen. They're really doing it. And then last night at the audience opening night, just going bananas when that happened. But so you kind of set up this situation where Peter's life's getting turned upside down as even he goes back to school and people that have known him for years are treating him differently. Of course, Flash wants to treat him like his best friend. He's written a book. It's all in character for that Flash's kind of personality for the sort of thing that he would do. But his life is turned upside down and nothing is remotely normal anymore. And because he's been framed for a crime, there's a side that people just believe that. I'm glad they didn't go too far down that path. I'm glad that like immediately Daredevil shows up and says, these charges aren't going to stick. This isn't, there's like a video that None of the evidence actually points towards you, so you're fine. I'm glad that they didn't really go down that direction with the plotline besides people investigating him. And I think maybe they oversold the general public turning on him, but there certainly would be the conspiracy theorists that would believe a video and pick sides on this one. But it's the sort of thing of like Spider-Man Peter Parker is an Avenger that saved the planet. Mysterio shows up for like a week, stops some things, and this video comes out, and there's like these mirage technology. There's like all these things that like if you have that, there's all this evidence of what was kind of going on there of like you could just tell a story. And so it's one of those things that like would ring really hollow if they went too far down that path. There's always people who believe the conspiracy theories and incline towards the conspiracy theories. But as a police investigation, one video that was doctored, when you have all of the witnesses from Peter's school that can say that's not what really happened. There's all these witnesses that can testify to Peter's version of the story, not this other side. So it would ring hollow if they went too far down that path. So I'm glad that they didn't, and they treated it more like a battle of public opinions, as Daredevil put it. But then the big thing that pushes things forward is that they don't get into college. And what I liked about this is that they played into something very human, which is what this trilogy of Spider-Man films has done really well, is tell a very high school story about someone wanting to go to homecoming, about going on road trips, being in clubs at school, and the immaturity of the characters. That, you know, Ned can't shut up. Well, even in the earlier section when he's being investigated, he just can't shut up and incriminates himself and doesn't even realize he's doing it. And what is such a key thing for high school for so many is getting into college. And the idea that bad press would play into that makes sense. That does ring true of how things would work. Like, there's a bunch of scandals surrounding you. Like, that's just not what we want. Like, we don't know what's going on, but we're not the ones that our job is to sort through that. And the scenes play with, like, have a lot more weight to them than I was expecting, because it's not just Peter, it's his friends. And that's the thing that I think really elevates it, that Peter's realizing my life, this thing that's true of me, is hurting the people that I care about the most on this very relatable level. We all had these plans to go off to college. We've been working towards it. And then because of me, my friends' lives are messed up. My girlfriend's life is messed up. And it lets it sit. And that's one of the things that I think was really good about this film. This trilogy of films are known for being very funny and light. And the MCU is known for putting too much humor into their films and not letting powerful moments sit before they throw a joke in. They're very infamous for something dramatic happens, and before you can get sad, it breaks the tension with a joke. And this movie doesn't do that. This movie actually allows you to sit in the sorrow, the tragedy, the hurt. Whether it's college admission or a death of a character, you sit in it and feel it. And so even with these kids trying to get into college, it pauses for you to sink that in of like the life that they planned for themselves isn't going to happen or can't happen anymore. And I thought it was handled really nicely. And in light of, like, even of this film, it makes this trilogy of films work a little bit better as just high school movies. That's certainly one of the genres they are. They are high school movies. You know, number one, they're going on a road trip to Washington, D.C., and then they're going to homecoming, obviously, as the title even says. And then the second one, it's all about a high school European trip, which is like a classic subgenre of films. There's not a lot of them anymore, but 80s, 90s, zeros, that was a genre of films, and this was an addition to it. And then here closes it out with closing out high school of graduating, going to college. What's your plan? What are you going to do? And it lets you feel the emotions of just the very human high school side to that. And I know I'm lingering on this for a long time, but it made me appreciate that aspect of these films even more, and what I think really works about them nicely. I think this film highlighted a bunch of the things I enjoyed about this Tom Holland set of films, as well as kind of highlighting some of why perhaps I didn't like some things in the previous two films, in particular the last one. And because this was the event that leads to the choice that he makes that kicks the plot in motion, it's also really important to understand that this is the part that worked, of like making me believe the sense of the loneliness, the sense that he's trapped because of where he's at, that drives him to do something impulsive. I just need to build that point because I'm going to criticize what I'm about to get to. This part worked, the next part doesn't, which leads us to... So Peter decides to visit his buddy Doctor Strange to ask him to cast a spell to fix this problem of his. And so as soon as he shows up, I'll say, I think before the movie came out, this was the thing I was most worried about. After I saw the movie, this is the thing that I criticized the most. And so I'll try and walk through everything about this that just didn't sit right with me, and the things that I think did work, or maybe how it could have fixed. But so the way they go into this is literally you have this really heartbroken moment of he realizes that him and his friends are trapped. He looks up, sees Wizard, and then it immediately cuts to the sequence that we saw in the trailer of him asking Doctor Strange to do something. And in one sense, I don't think that's a problem. In another sense, this feels a lot like we needed this to linger longer for this to work for me. And this will be a recurring theme throughout this, my criticism of this section of the film, of the movie obviously can't be 4 hours long, and you don't want it to be 90 minutes of Peter Parker having a crisis, a life crisis, existential crisis or whatever about everything. And then he decides to go to cast a spell and make this dramatic request. Therefore, they know the payoff is the second half, so they really rush through this part of it to get there. So it's like, oh man, I didn't get involved. I'm really bummed out. Wait, I know a wizard. He knows how to change time. Let's go ask him to change time. That's very quick for how big of a request this is. So he goes, and they have this. It's interesting with movies. They always try and find ways to make things a little bit more interesting, to make it stand out. So how do you make Doctor Strange's place just a little bit more interesting? They find this excuse to where the whole place is covered in snow. Therefore, Doctor Strange is wearing a sweater and drinking out of a quirky coffee mug. And you do something simple like that just makes the scene a little bit more interesting, even though it has nothing to do with the plot of the movie. Like, you show up and you see the trailers, and you're like, why is this place covered in snow? What on earth is going on here in this sequence? And you see the movie, and still there's like, it tells you why, but it doesn't tie into anything. It just makes the scene, the sequence, just a little bit more amusing. And so the two of them start talking. And I think maybe even part of why some of this rings hollow to me is that I feel like Doctor Strange just feels like so many different people depending on the moment in the scene. And he's quirky and lighthearted. And then 2 minutes later, he's like, wow, you just need to sort your life out, kid. And it's like, what? You're changing awfully fast. So he shows up and it's like, oh, call me Steven. We've changed. Oh, well, Steven. Oh, well, that felt weird, but I'll allow it. And they're joking around. And so Peter wants him to turn back time. And the first reaction, as soon as Doctor Strange hears this, is like, the only reason we did that before was to bring back half of all living life in the universe. Just to fix the inconvenience of your life. That's not worth it. And then when you hear Peter like, no, it's not just me, it's also my friends' lives. In comparison to the context under which time has been changed before, it still feels like, hey, I get it that your deal sucks, but a lot of people have things in their lives that suck. And so his first reaction to it is the one that makes the most sense. He contrasts it with the other times that we've messed with time. It was for the ultimate reason and cause. You don't normally mess with time. It can have great consequences, but you do it when it saves billions and billions and billions of lives across the universe. You don't do it just because your life kind of sucks now. We all have twists and turns in life. So that response makes sense. And he's also like, but I also don't have Time Stone anymore. It's gone. I can't do that trick anymore. And then throughout the whole thing, the word forget is mentioned, and Doctor Strange has this epiphany in his mind of like, That's it. I don't need to turn back time. I just cast this spell that I've cast many times before to erase people's memories. And Wong's like, that's a bad idea. It messes with the unknown and could cause big problems. As it turns out, he's right about that. Dark said, don't worry about it. And so then they go downstairs immediately. It's like, I've got an idea. Let's just go downstairs. They walk downstairs, and before pausing for a moment to discuss any of this, Doctor Strange starts casting. He goes, well, it's been nice knowing you. Yeah, it's gonna, we're all gonna forget. And he's like, wait, Peter's like, we're all gonna forget. You mean everybody? And he's like, well, I don't want Ned to forget. And he starts listing people off. And that sets, of course, the motion that the spell gets messed up because Peter wouldn't shut up because Doctor Strange didn't tell him what was going to happen before. And thus, damage is done. Doctor Strange pops out of it at the end and he goes, wait, this is actually a dangerous spell. Like, hey, man, I know your life sucks, but this, deal with it. You got two personalities. You got to figure out how to balance your life. Starts talking like an adult to him. And so for the last 2 days since I posted my reviews, actually for months now, since the first trailer came out and I had issues with this as the setup, people have been arguing with me like, hey, don't you know impulsive people? Hey, don't you know people that just you've never done anything impulsive? Like, why does this ring hollow to me? This is my big criticism of the film, is this scene right here, this sequence right here, as the setup for everything else, rings too hollow. Why does it ring hollow? Because it requires both of them to be impulsive. You have to have Peter Parker go, oh, my life sucks. I'm going to go ask someone to change the whole timeline. That's not a small request. That's a big request. And you're erasing everything good that's happened to anyone in the world over the last few days. So you're violating everyone else's autonomy and their choices in doing so without their consent. That's a big thing to ask. Maybe a high schooler would do that. He goes to Doctor Strange, says it. Clearly, Doctor Strange thinks this is a very big ask in light of things. So he doesn't end up doing that. Then Doctor Strange realizes, wait, I could just erase everybody's memory. In which case, I'd say maybe that's even a bigger violation. It is a violation of everyone in the world to erase their memories, change their thoughts without their permission, just for one person's inconvenience. Like, that is a huge deal. Even to Doctor Strange himself. Doctor Strange clearly has such a connection to Peter that he's willing to do this magic spell for him. They've saved the universe together. Therefore, he has a bond with him and impulsively goes, yeah, I will cast this spell that will make me not know who you are anymore. I will do that. And he's aware that this is a big loss, but like he just impulsively goes with it. And so he has to be impulsive too. Peter impulsively like, yeah, change the timeline. Steven's like, I'll impulsively erase everyone's memory. Both of them have to do that. And then both of them also have to not have the people skills to talk about it before it starts. And that's even probably a bigger issue for me, is that people do impulsive things. So Doctor Strange, he's arrogant. People in the comments keep telling me, oh, he's done a bunch of times. So he's arrogant enough to think that he can do this. And as he says in the movie, he forgets that Peter's young. So he forgets that Peter wouldn't have thought through the implications of this spell, which he couldn't have thought through the implications of the spell because he's proposing a different spell. So Peter couldn't do that. But so he's arrogant. He's impulsive. He's like, yeah, let's just go do this. But he doesn't stop to think about the parameters of the spell. He doesn't stop to think, all right, so Peter, as we do this, no one's going to know. I'm not going to remember who you are. Doctor Strange's brilliant man doesn't stop and think about that. Doesn't have even for a moment have that thought. Peter doesn't hear you. Oh, everyone's going to forget. Does that mean everyone? Neither one of them have to have the people skills to go, before we start this, let's make sure we have clarity of this. When I go to the drive-thru, any fast food place, I get the same thing every single time. Still, before we order, my wife double checks to make sure it's what I want. I make sure that she's got it the right order, and we double check it. Just getting fast food at places we eat all the time, getting the same thing. This isn't just some small thing. When you do, people are impulsive usually about trivial things. Some people can be impulsive about big, gigantic, massive things. If you're impulsive about changing the timeline or erasing everyone's memory and don't in any way pause and think, this isn't a category where you can't just jump into the deep end, on either one of those, you're not just impulsive, you are dangerously reckless with other people's lives. Which is what this movie implies both of them are, that they're just insanely reckless with other people's lives, that have no concept of consent with other people. That's my issue with this. So you go, well, yeah, but they're both impulsive. Yeah, I mean, he's arrogant. Right, I gotcha. There has to be some constraints to that. There has to be some degree to which he thinks ahead. There has to be some degree to which, if you're a grown-up and someone walks up to you and says, hey, can you change the entire timeline? Your immediate thought is like, well, you better have a really good reason you want me to do that. Someone walks up to you and says, hey, I want you to erase everyone in the world's memories. I don't care how impulsive you are, just your natural instinct is to go, well, you better have a really good reason for wanting to do that. And the movie doesn't do that. It doesn't provide that. And so that's where this whole thing rings hollow, feels contrived to me, that I put more thought into what seats I was going to sit in for my showing of this movie and the showing I'm going to see tomorrow, where I'm going to take my kid. I thought it was like, okay, we'll make sure I'm on the aisles so I can take my kids out to the bathroom. Then they put into erasing everyone's memories. And so some people have asked me, like, what would I do different? How would I set it up different? Well, I think part of the problem is that the way this plays out isn't the most interesting thing about the film. I didn't see like anyone coming out of the movie saying, and I loved the way the film was set up. You guys were okay with it. It didn't bother you, but you didn't think that was the best thing about the movie. Yeah, like Peter wouldn't shut up. I loved that. No, you loved all the people showing up. You loved the humor. You loved the tragedy. You loved the action, the scope, the epicness, not this specific setup. And they knew that going into the movie. Therefore, they didn't want to have to spend the hard work earning this moment. They just wanted it to happen. And that's why I say things like, it feels a little kind of tried, feels a little bit lazy, it feels a little bit cheap. Because if you could make this idea work, that Peter could be in such a place he's able to convince Doctor Strange, but you have to set things up to, there's a reason that they're there, and there's a better reason that they mess up the spell than they just didn't stop for 10 seconds to talk. And that's the thing right there. The whole movie happens. All the awesome epic stuff happens, not because of competing value sets, not because of a misunderstanding and all these things coming together at the perfect storm of badness, not because of some dramatic thing. The whole plot, all the interesting stuff happens because two people were impulsive and didn't pause for 10 seconds to talk about parameters before casting a spell. That is not nearly as compelling as what comes afterwards. That is my issue. And I'm lingering on this because this is the thing that people keep asking me about, people keep commenting about. And they're like, you didn't understand. If you paid attention, you'd see there's all this nuance in the sequence. Well, it's in the comics. And when people say things in that tone, in that manner of like, dude, you just didn't get it. You don't convince me to your side when you do that. Because I understood the scene. I understood the nuance. They just very quickly ran through something and had the least compelling thing about the movie. The least interesting thing is the way this all plays out that sets up all the interesting stuff. Everything before is better. Everything after is better. And the specific thing that really kicks it in motion, they just needed it to happen. If you're the person that thought this was the best scene in the movie, let me know down below in the comment section. But so anyway, they go to cast the spell. Peter keeps talking and something goes wrong. So Doctor Strange realizes, oh, this isn't going to work. So he traps the spell in a box, realizing that it's a corrupted spell. And he snaps out of it immediately. And he's like, you can see he's gone from happy, let's work with you, to arrogant, annoyed Doctor Strange almost immediately, and starts chastising him about making better choices. And then at the end of it, like he realizes, I forget that you're a kid because of everything we've gone through. And he's like, if you've already petitioned them and argued your case, and Peter's like, I can do that. And I think they put this line in the movie both to acknowledge somewhat the ridiculousness of they had to find dialogue in there to why on earth would Doctor Strange enable a high schooler in this way? And so they put a line of dialogue in there that's true, that if you can forget how old someone is or how young someone is if you've done a lot of life with them. Going to space and saving the universe is about as much of a lot of life as you can have getting blipped together on a distant planet after traveling on a spaceship and battling Thanos. That's kind of as, big of an experience as you can have to maybe distort your perception of someone. But then kind of has this moment where he also says, you can go and plead your case. And it's also the sort of thing that kind of makes all this other stuff ring hollow of like Doctor Strange that like knows to ask that, to make that statement after, but he says it afterwards to set in motion the next thing that happens in the plot. And it's like, what? Right. If you'd had this conversation before, if you just said, hey, you can plead your case, they don't do this. The whole movie doesn't happen. That's why it feels flimsy. If the whole movie can take place, if Doctor Strange had said this one sentence a little bit earlier, which he could have, probably should have, other than the screenwriters needed to happen later, it rings hollow. Fronts my frustrations. And so it just feels like Doctor Strange dramatically changes characters from jokey guy to serious guy. And a bunch of us were saying this about the trailer, like, feels like there's two Doctor Stranges. This one feels like he might be an imposter, and this one feels like the Doctor Strange that we know. And as it turns out, I thought those scenes were going to be like 30 minutes apart and a bunch of stuff happens. They're not. There's like 2 minutes apart. 5 minutes apart. It's like very close together. Moving right along, and I'll start talking a little bit faster, hopefully. Otherwise, this will be a long review. And people start showing up. So Peter Parker goes to try and talk to the admissions lady to convince her to give his friends a second chance, plead his case to them. And while he's there, Dr. Octopus shows up. And as soon as he's there, immediately, it's just nice to see him again. He's still so fun, so crazy in the role, and watching him try and figure out what on earth is going on with this other Peter Parker, it's just a joy. And you think, like I saw it last night with my kids, and they don't understand. They saw Spider-Man 2 within the last year, and they don't understand what some of this means to us. And so when the audience started going wild, they're like, what's going on? Why is everyone so happy to see him? Like, they just didn't get it, which was entertaining in of itself to have people going wild and my kids being like, huh? I don't get it. But just him saying, hello, Peter. So good, so satisfying, so fun, and bringing out all the nostalgia buttons. And then as he sees Tom Holland's face in the spider suit and just doesn't understand what's going on, just so good. And this kind of sets in motion this whole section where Green Goblin shows up, and as you think you're about to see him, and my audience you could feel the energy in the room, and they get sucked away, and people are like, oh. And having seen it before everyone else, knowing he's going to come back, and there's so much of him. That was a lot of fun. So it kind of sets up this plot line with Peter trying to hunt everybody down. Doctor Strange gives him a device, and get the whole section where he gets his buddies to help catch them. And this is, I said in my review, this feels just kind of a little bit, I don't know, pedestrian, feels simplistic in this part, because it's like, okay, multiverse people are here, and then we spend 15, 20 minutes just catching them. Which feels like the plot of an episode of a TV show. Like, they accidentally miscast a spell and they got to catch everybody to send them back. So, okay. And once again, this needs to happen in the plot to set up the interesting and the good stuff. But as it's happening, it's like, okay, it's fun to see people, but that's the appeal of this. It's not a compelling plot, really. It's just fun to see these characters in front of us. And so Jamie Foxx shows up as Electro, and Sandman is there. And they weren't as exciting because they weren't as iconic of villains, and they weren't in films that was as memorable, but still it was fun to see them. And it was, what I was surprised by is how enjoyable it was just to watch the villains banter once they were captured. And just the discovery of the fact that in these universes, each of the characters would know about the other characters in their universe, but they're from different points in time in their universe, in which case some of them know when others have died and things like that. And so it just played out, and it was like fascinating. And you're going to be like watching the Spider-Men interact with each other. I'm not expecting to like seeing Jamie Foxx and Alfred Molina interacting, that being a lot of fun. That's what I really wasn't expecting from the film. And then what I also kind of, so we get Green Goblin lands, and initially he's like blowing stuff up, and then we see him kind of as like a crazy homeless person, really lost and confused at first, and he ends up going to Aunt May for help. And so Peter shows up, and you see Norman Osborn in a very different state than we've ever seen him before. And at first it felt like off, like why is he acting like this? And you think He's a guy that loses his mind. He just showed up in a different universe. His house is gone. His son is gone. And he's having like a mental snap. And it was like a very interesting place to take the character. And this really lets you see the Norman Osborn in a new light of how much he was a victim of what he turned himself into. Even when you see it in Spider-Man 2002, the way it plays out is that Green Goblin is talking to him in being, the devil on his shoulder that's speaking to his worst desires of getting revenge on people that wronged him. And so then there was a side to which he was giving into the Goblin because it helped him. Whereas here, he doesn't have anything to gain. He's lost everything already. And the Goblin is only going to cost him more. And so you see Norman in a very different light in what they do with him in this film. And this part also starts to set up a really important arc in this film, which is using Aunt May as Tom Holland's Uncle Ben, which is just a fascinating turn of events because we're so used to Uncle Ben is that voice in his life. And he's been Spider-Man for 5 years and we've had no references to Uncle Ben at all. And that's so pivotal to our understanding of Spider-Man becoming the Spider-Man that we know. And then we get to this film and it very much makes it clear that didn't happen. We assumed it happened. They just didn't reference it. But this is, it didn't happen. And we'll talk, of course, later. But Aunt May is the person that starts being that moral compass that teaches the value set into Peter even more so of, well, of course you have to help these people. It is your responsibility. And I because this is an alternate version, suddenly that plays a little bit better. That works using her in that fashion. And so she becomes the person that's like, Peter, like you have to help him. Doesn't matter that he's from a different time, like you have to help him. And so kind of this takes us back to the layer where suddenly Doctor Strange and Spider-Man have different perspectives. To me, this is where the movie really kicks into gear, where you get the Doctor Strange versus Spider-Man conflict, which is through the banter of all of our villains and Norman Osborn showing up, and they start talking and we start to fully realize these people realized who Peter Parker was, most of them right before they died, in which case, if they get sent back, they're being sent back at a state of time where they will die. And there's some flimsiness to the logic of what's going to happen because it's just the movie's very intentionally not specific about how exactly some of this stuff works. Like, is Norman Osborn a second away from dying? Because him being cured won't fix that. Or is he? When exactly is he plugged from? The movie's intentionally vague of like how this is going to work. And if you send them back fixed, does this just create branched timelines? That's kind of interesting to think about. There's this branched timeline of they fixed someone, so they send Electro back, and instead of him getting vaporized, he comes back as normal guy, or however all these ones would. You don't want to go through each of them, but what exactly does that mean if you send them back and their timeline has changed when we've seen the two Spider-Men later down in the line having been in the timeline where they weren't fixed? And of course, based off endgame physics timelines, it branches, so that's an interesting concept of how that works and the implications of everything happening with this. And how that can happen now because the TVA is gone. The MCU is getting real complex in the timelines and multiverse theory and everything. But, so Doctor Strange said, that's not our business. We need to send them back. That is their fate. Peter Parker, because of who he is, because of his heart and because of Aunt May and what she's saying to him, he just won't allow that to happen without trying to do something about it. So he decides, I'm going to battle Doctor Strange. So he decides to steal the box, locks Doctor Strange up for just a little bit. And so he starts running off. Doctor Strange chases him. Doctor Strange isn't trying to hurt him. Doctor Strange is just trying to get the box back. So Doctor Strange does his little projection punch. And I don't think the movie makes it entirely clear as to why Peter's able to kind of control himself just a little bit. I think the implication is because he has the magic spell box in his hand that maybe it's breaking the power, something like that, that he has something tied to the box. I'm imagining is why Peter is able to move his body even though he was pushed out of it, and then why he was able to float back to it. But it's just fun to see Doctor Strange being like confused by what's happening and see someone swim back to their body against all of that. But I don't really know what was going on there, and the movie doesn't fully explain it, but the box in the hand, I guess, would be what's kind of making that possible. So anyway, this fun little Doctor Strange sequence with all the kaleidoscope reality bending in, the cities turning, the Inception and Dark City visuals that I just think are a ton of fun to watch because they're like Escher paintings come to life, but now we see Spider-Man in them. And I mean, I think the idea that Spider-Man wins this fight feels a little bit unlikely. Doctor Strange is pretty smart and pretty powerful, and they're like he's really not trying to hurt Peter. He understands what Peter is doing, why he's doing it. But the idea that Peter uses geometry to understand kaleidoscope mirror reality and that Doctor Strange gets trapped by this feels a little bit like they needed that to happen for everything in the plot to take place. I don't know that I fully buy into it. Like it doesn't really bother me. Just like, I'm not quite sure that's how this would play out, that he could win by doing that. But it is fun, the idea that someone would see the geometry of it all, and being a math whiz would go, oh, I just need to use the geometry and follow this. That was fun. That was clever. But so they sideline Doctor Strange so that the rest of the plot can take place. And this, to me, is where the movie just starts to, you feel the energy, and it starts getting a lot more interesting. And I was concerned about the movie going into it because the setup didn't feel like, that doesn't feel, I've talked about for way too long in this video. That rings a bit hollow to me. And then you just see people showing up and fighting. This is the missing piece of where like that's interesting and compelling. That Peter's worldview won't let him send villains back to die. That he thinks, if I can help them, I need to try. And one thing I've been realizing about the previous two Tom Holland Spider-Man movies is that they're fun high school movies. They're fun MCU films, especially Homecoming. I have a few more issues with Far From Home, but there is a ton of entertainment value there. But I think that they're better high school movies and MCU movies than Spider-Man movies. And I think this even ties into why. This central concept of with great power comes great responsibility, that worldview of Spider-Man, even some of the iconic Spider-Man images, the loss of the uncle, that sense of someone died because of me, that's kind of been missing because they just kind of cotton candy, high school hijinks, and some superhero stuff with Nick Fury, who's actually Talos, with Iron Man. And here, even though you have Doctor Strange in it for lots of the movie, even though you have all these nostalgia characters, it's the one where Tom Holland finally gets his real Spider-Man arc of the lesson, with great power comes great responsibility, that there is a burden that comes with being Peter Parker and Spider-Man. There's costs that come to the relationships. It puts the people closest to him in jeopardy. That the choices he make might cost him the people closest to him, but he still needs to choose to do the right thing to try and help people, because with great power comes great responsibility. And the meat of that, finally having it in the back half of this film, is what makes the back half of this film a great Spider-Man story. Not just because we have a lot of Spider-Man in it. It's because Tom Holland gets his actual Spider-Man arc in it. He actually gets to learn those lessons and not just be the immature high school kid. And so you get all of the classic Spider-Man origin story beats in the second half of this film, just at a point in time you're not expecting it, because we're thinking origin story is the start of the story. And here, it's the end of this trilogy, which is interesting. Even as I'm saying this, I'm like, oh, that's really cool what they did with this movie. How they found a way to totally complete the Spider-Man story by doing it at the end rather than the beginning, and doing it in a totally different way than you'd expect, while you're paying attention to all the nostalgia villains and the returning Spider-Man. But at its core, this is really where Tom Holland stops being Spider-Boy and becomes Spider-Man. So Peter sets out to cure each of our villains so he can send them back and give them a chance to live. And this is another one of these sequences that was satisfying in a way that I really wasn't expecting going into the movie. And likewise, that the trailers don't feature anything from this. And I love that. That they, like, this movie marketed itself in a way that it broke pandemic box office records, smashed them. Like, nothing is remotely close to the numbers that this movie is getting. As of this morning, we got the Thursday night numbers. It made $50 million Thursday night opening showings here in the US. That's the third biggest ever behind Endgame and Force Awakens. And we're in a pandemic. That tells you how powerful this movie is. And they marketed the movie in a way where they left out these entire subplots and obviously didn't even use the biggest hook that they had in any of the marketing and flat out lied about it. Flat out lied about this stuff, and they're still breaking records. And so this might be one of the greatest marketing campaigns of all time. I don't know how much they intentionally leaked stuff. I don't know how much they did that on purpose to try and get some stuff rolling and wanted to say things without saying it to make the speculation, but they pulled it off. Anyway, back to curing people. And you see Tom Holland, Peter Parker teaming up with Raimi-verse Norman Osborn to cure Dr. Octopus. And just seeing them work together, talking about Tony Stark technology, there's just something so interesting to me about all these weird little interactions about this world. And they create this chip and they put it in Dr. Octopus to restore that chip that was broken back in 2004. 2004 when that chip broke. 17 years later, it gets repaired in this movie, which is, you stop and think about how crazy that is. That's the world we live in right now of movies and nerddom. 17 years later, Dr. Octopus's chip is finally fixed. And you get Dr. Octavius back. And once again starts working together with Peter Parker, this different Peter Parker and Norman Osborn. And I just love those little interactions. And they very much were in line with one of the things I loved about Infinity War was just seeing Tony Stark and Doctor Strange riffing, and then Chris Pratt shows up, Star-Lord, and he's bantering back and forth, Drax and with Tony Stark, all of that stuff. And then, Star-Lord with Peter Parker talking about movie references. I loved that. And this movie does the same thing with nerdy stuff. With characters I would have thought it would be really fun to see these two people talk. And then it is. And that is like where this movie just like started like having this next level type of like, wow, like I never knew I wanted this and you're delivering it to me. And even the music as it swells as Dr. Octavius is cured, and it's such a victory in that moment that immediately it started causing dread in me because I know we're only halfway through the movie. And this is such a moment of victory. It's working. And now you have Peter Parker, Norman Osborn, and Dr. Octavius all working together to cure things. Of course they can do it. These people are brilliant. And then they keep cutting outside the Lizard, and J. Jonah Jameson shows up. And you're like, something bad is going to happen. There's like this ominous sense, this whole thing is going to collapse. And once again, things that this movie did right that I think were missing from the previous two films, this movie kind of highlighted what was missing. A real sense of danger, stakes, and impending doom, dread. And we're in an apartment doing experiments, and you just know this harmony is going to collapse soon. It was really well done. I mean, I think this just showed Jon Watts has more range than doing light high school Peter Parker fun. They have this scene where you have Norman Osborn, Dr. Octavius working, and they're talking, and we'll finally have just be one of you in there, and you just hear the goblin voice come from Norman's body. They don't show his face. You don't see the grin or anything. You just hear his voice. And we know exactly what that means. We know exactly what's going to go down. And they keep cutting back outside. Jonah Jameson is trying to go in. And police are on their way. And it cuts to Peter. And he starts having his spidey sense. And another thing this movie did really well was really capturing the spidey sense of him like feeling this danger in the world and visualizing it in a way that you, as soon as it happens, you're like, you get tense because you know something's up and you're trying to figure it out. And you think, that's what he's doing. He feels something and he's trying to figure out what he's feeling. And that's just great direction. That's a great creative idea. If us as the audience are suddenly in the experience of Peter Parker in the movie, you've created something immersive for us as you do that. And so that kind of takes place. And he goes after Norman, and you just see the brilliance of Willem Dafoe and an older style of villain. Just, you don't get a lot of just this amped up of a performance from this guy, that he is just going for it and can transform through his face, his voice, all change between the two characters inside of his mind. And he's just cranked up to 11, crazy as the Goblin, and was so meek and broken as Norman. And you buy into every little bit of what he's doing. So he just starts talking, and you like, back to like great direction, writing and things like that. So they create this piece of tech that goes on Electro's chest that it gives a little visual timer of how long until it's done. Like it has to go all the way around before it takes all the energy out. And so you can see it, and it goes a little bit slow when they put it on. This will take a few minutes. And then we feel something's not quite right. We hear Green Goblin's voice. There's this little timer on his chest. And we know that could be bad. And they've proper setup in a movie. That's a Tony Stark arc reactor. This is a guy... Actually, this is a Tony Stark reactor right here. Let's put our visual in place. There we go. There we go. We now have to have our... We have to have our Tony Stark reactor back there for this arc. We know we've got one of those right over there. We know we have Electric Guy right over here. And you can see he's tempted. And the whole time he's been there, clearly been tempted. But he's going along with their plan, and he's got the thing on, and you're just watching the timer. And then you see Norman, you know he's coming. You see J. Jonah Jameson is outside. Norman's getting crazier and crazier. And while he's saying this stuff, giving his little speech, you see there's only one line left. We're this close. And if Electro's on our side, we'll be okay. And if Electro switches sides, this is going to go south very quickly. And he rips it off before that. Like, that is great tension building, dread, stakes, like all of those big words that you want in action movies that put you at the edge of your seat because you know something bad can happen, and you have a ticking clock. And so you just feel that tension inside of you. That's this, like, why was this movie so powerful? Why did you have such a great theatrical experience? That is why. All of this was so well crafted, so well put together, so well set up. Back to what I didn't like about the movie, I would say the opposite about that stuff earlier. I like all of the proper setup, feeling reasonable, everything feeling earned that I feel in this scene. I don't feel that in those earlier scenes. This scene was set up properly with all the little tension clocks to build up to it. The earlier one just happened. They're impulsive. That's why they did it. He's arrogant. He's immature. That's the way you justify the earlier sequence. Whereas this one, how does this happen? All these little pieces that they've been building towards for the last 30 minutes of runtime, little statements, little pieces of tech they've shown you, that little arc reactor right over there, all that little stuff. That's why this scene was so great to me. In the first half, felt pedestrian by comparison. Because this one, I'm like, as I'm talking about it, I'm like, man, do I need to increase my rating of this film? Because this was even better than I thought as I'm breaking it down in my mind. I loved what they did in this scene. It was so well done. And we're not even to the Spider-Man yet. So anyway, things go bad. Fight breaks out. The wrong person is there to be able to film all of it. He's already called the police, and so police are on the way. And they've cooked up some cure stuff that they think might be able to cure Norman. But they got to get out of the building. Aunt May is there, and so they're running, desperation, things smashing, explosions taking place everywhere. And we get downstairs, and it's basically Peter versus Norman Osborn, and Peter is losing. Aunt May is right there. And she's not willing to run. It has just a nice little touch that you have an Aunt May that was hot Aunt May. So I mean, she's in her late 50s and looks incredible. Actually, she might be mid 50s, looks incredible. And so that also means that she's believable and able to be going into action. The Aunt May was it Rose from the previous movies? I forget Rosemary, I believe is the actress's name. She's legitimately a very old lady. And it's tough to like really buy into her going into action in some of these ways against Norman Osborn. But Marissa Tomei, you can buy into it much more so. And they give her those moments that she's not just telling Peter to do stuff, she does too. And so she goes into action and gives him the cure, tries to stop him, and he makes his cart deal fly in, and it hits her. And as soon as his flying thing shows up, it's like, oh, she's going to get hit by that. It's going to kill her. She's going to hit and then so she does get hit, and then he throws the bomb, and Peter tries to grab it and doesn't fully block it. And so I'm pretty sure she's going to die, and they give you just enough hope that she's going to be okay, and they're talking, and then she starts collapsing. And you're like, this is going down. And when you start to realize exactly what they're doing here, that they're making her the Uncle Ben of this journey. And they've earned that they're changing the mythology, and I'm fine with that because it's a good story. It's a great character. It makes her consequential in a new, interesting way. And she spent all this time being supportive, being the person there. And then now she's been the person in action, and she's been that moral compass to him in this film, teaching him the lessons that Uncle Ben taught other Spider-Men traditionally. And then she has this moment where she's dying, and says she's had already by this point in time given her version, add an extra line into it or word into it. But with great power comes great responsibility. Like she's like, this is the right thing to do. Whatever happens, this was the right thing to do. Like you have the opportunity to help them. You have the opportunity to save them. You have to do that. And then even as she's dying, she says, this was the right thing to do. Like, I'm dying, but we did the right thing. And through her actions teaches him this lesson that he's very slowly needing to learn. And I mentioned this before, but one of the great things about this movie is that it lets you feel the emotions. So her death, it sits there in it. And death sequences, it's not just that you see them die, but you see the reactions of the people that cared about them most. So of course, Peter's right there and he's devastated. And you sit on that and you linger in it. But the other important thing they need to do is Happy pulls up. And Happy's relationship to Aunt May has been it's been a punchline to a joke. That's what it is. It's always been that. It's never actually been like we care about their relationship. It's just amusing that Happy is dating her and fun because he's has such a crush on her and she's just having fun with him. And so it's kind of cute and charming. But in this moment, it shows Happy's response to seeing exactly what's taken place. And it doesn't play it for a joke. It treats his feelings towards her as absolutely genuine because they were. It was funny for us, but he's a person that just lost another person because of this superhero business. And it just lets you feel that. And then there's all these guns pointed at them. And even in that moment, he's like, run, get out of here. Like he's still thinking, I need to protect Peter. Once again, to the importance of these arcs that they've had, that Happy was only annoyed by Peter Parker in Homecoming until the last few scenes. And what this journey has kind of turned into of his perception of Peter, what he means to what Aunt May really meant to him. And that of all, maybe Ant-Man is probably even more lighter, more comedy based because those ones don't kind of have even the heavy moments. And these Spider-Man ones have had heavy moments, but they're very light comedy based films. But of all the MCU franchises, this probably is the one that, along with Ant-Man, has the most humor and jokes to it. And it didn't break the tension, break the moment. It really sits in it. You see both of their reactions, and then it goes to a somber newscast where it's just heartbreaking for us as the audience to see J. Jonah Jameson using this to build his platform to misrepresent what took place. And that's a new level of tragedy to this. You're seeing now the public's perception of it. It's being used as a tool against Spider-Man, as it's the full opposite of that in reality. And that's heartbreaking. And then we transition to Ned and MJ and their reaction to it, that they've lost this person that means so dear to them, that is aunt, who's really the mother to this character in the way that her role to him, and it's someone that they know as well. And this plan that they were on is collapsing, and they just care so deeply about their friend, and we sit in the moment with them again. So you just have minutes straight in a fun superhero comedy lingering on the impact of a character's death. And they did that. And I appreciate that so much. And that'll lead us to the part of the movie where my audience just went bananas. Where it just went wild. Ned, MJ, sitting there lingering about the death of Aunt May, the escape of the villains. And MJ's like, I'm going to push the button. We're going to nuke these guys. We got to end this. We cannot. This is too dangerous. Ned's like, no, we need to talk to Peter. We need to talk. I wish I could just see him. And they slowly set this up. Then maybe this was a little bit too rushed of Ned the magician, Ned the sorcerer. But they had a series of little things happen throughout the movie that actually set this moment up. That they didn't do a full development of it. Maybe they could have done more. There's a little line of dialogue. As soon as Ned shows up, Doctor Strange's crib, he's like, hey, my aunt says, or my grandma, which I remember was, says, we've got a little magic in our family. Dr. Strange's like, really? Yeah, you got some tingles in your fingers? Go see a doctor. Just kind of dismisses it. But that little line of dialogue, that's setup. That's having a moment that cracks a door a little bit, puts the foot in the door just a little bit to earn this later moment. And then as Peter locks up Doctor Strange over the Grand Canyon, there's this little moment where he pulls the magic ringy deal off Doctor Strange's finger. And you get a little joke of he goes, ow, as it happens, to emphasize that something was just pulled off of his finger. And the person it's thrown to is Ned. He catches it. And so it's little pauses till you see that to set up this moment. He's got his on his finger and he just does this. And you start to realize Ned actually does have powers and starts. And when it first happened, I was like, what? What is the sparkle? Oh, yeah, that's right. He has that thing on his finger. That's right. They took that from Doctor Strange. Oh, yeah. He said earlier he has a little magic in his finger. Wait, where are we going with this? So he starts doing that and they go, I wish I could see Peter. And you see a portal open and there's a Spider-Man in there running down an alley. Both showings I saw, as soon as that portal opened and you saw Spider-Man, and even you could really see the costume he's in, but it's not the one that Tom Holland has been wearing, and Tom Holland looks destroyed right now, and he's not in that alleyway. Like, what is this about to go down? And you could feel the room. You could just feel the room change, the energy, and he hops through, and it's clearly a different costume, and he pulls it off. And that liar, Andrew Garfield, is in this movie. Explicitly saying repeatedly in multiple interviews, I'm not in the movie. Pulls it off. Andrew Garfield standing there. Press screening, people like, yeah! And wasn't a packed crowd because it was only press. And so there's a lot of people in the press screening, but it wasn't packed. But you still had clapping. When I saw it last night, and he jumps through. Everyone knew exactly what was happening. He takes the mask off. Everyone was shouting. Everyone was clapping. The guys in the row in front of me were hopping up and down, yelling. And we like you couldn't hear the next dialogue for the next 10 seconds of the movie. Because everyone was losing it. And an extra layer of fun with this one, I'm watching it with my kids. And they can't understand it yet. They can't understand what everyone in that room was feeling in that moment. What you were feeling in that moment when you first saw that. And realized exactly where this is going. Worst kept secret in Hollywood that they were in this movie. Or where they were in this movie. Doesn't change that when you finally see it. and that Sony and Marvel Studios trusted the movie enough to not put it in the trailer. So we experienced that together in the theater. And my kids, they didn't get it. They're too young to fully understand exactly what this meant to all of us. And literally they turn to me and they go, what's happening right now? Is people, woo! And they've never been in a movie where that happened before. And the video I showed earlier of audience reactions, my daughter's in the shoes. I've never seen that before. And she meant that. And they're like, what's happening? I don't understand what's happening. And I tried to explain it to them later, like, kids. So then a few minutes later, we'll get to Toby shows up and go bananas again. And what's happening? Why? And like, kids, you understand, Tobey Maguire stopped being Spider-Man 5 years before my oldest was born. Almost 15 years ago, he stopped being Spider-Man. And Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out 2 months after my daughter was born. Her entire lifetime ago, he stopped being these parts. And those movies meant a lot to us. Like, the comic book movies obviously kind of defined, my life in a certain way, because this is what I do for a living now. And I've always loved these movies. And one of the big ones for the modern era is Spider-Man built the framework for everything that is the MCU in a lot of ways. And I told this in my Spider-Man 2002 review, but Spider-Man 2002 was the first movie I saw after my dad died in the theater. Obviously, I love movies and comic book characters and everything like that. My dad died in May of 2002 when that movie came out. And I remember going to go see it a couple weeks after it came out. He was in the hospital the week that it did come out. And I know my grandma was there, and I'm sure my sister and my mom were there, and we'd go see this movie. In this month that in most regards was one of the worst months of my life, to have such a tragic loss. For 2 hours and 10 minutes, 15, whatever the length of the movie is, I got to escape the pain of life, to go on this adventure with Spider-Man. And that's what movies can do. They can create that escape from the pain of life and tell these stories that inspire us, that excite us, that pull our emotions. And the first time I was able to do that after my dad died was with Spider-Man 2002. And for a lot of you, my honest, you're a lot of you are younger than me, and some of you, we were about 30, but you grew up like the comic book movies of your childhood were the Raimi Spider-Man movies. They were so formative for your love of this genre. And we haven't seen him play that part for 14 years. My buddy Griffin, he's like 15 years younger than me, something like that. And so the Spider-Man of his high school years was Andrew Garfield. And he did a video essay just a couple weeks back why Amazing Spider-Man 2 is his favorite. Most people, it's their least favorite. It's my least favorite, but it's his favorite. And that movie meant so much, and that character meant so much to him. And he hasn't seen him play that part for 7 years. And really, for the history of comic book characters, you stop playing the part, you don't come back. So we never thought we would see them again in these parts. There's no reason we would ever. Why would Tobey Maguire at 45 come back and play this part? Why would that happen? They've rebooted the franchise twice since Tobey Maguire. And then they rebooted the Amazing Spider-Man after the Amazing Spider-Man because those movies weren't being well received. Why would we ever see Andrew Garfield again? And then last night we got to see them again. And trying to explain that to my kids, that they can't get it yet because they're not old enough. They haven't had enough life to understand what that meant to so much. I'm literally like getting emotional, teared up, saying a lot of that, talking about. Maybe I do need to readjust my score for this movie if I can't even talk about it without getting emotional, tearing up a little bit. But like that was such we saw them again together, and it was fun. It was nostalgia done in such a special way that the Spider-Man cared about each other, and trying to get my kids to get that, like trying to explain to them like who's your favorite movie character? And they're like, I don't know. Like, well, pick someone. Imagine you didn't see them in that part for 15 years, and then they were back, and you got a little bit more time with them. That's how special that was. And just trying to explain, why did the theater erupt like that? That's why. We got more time with them. And that's amazing that they did that. And it's almost equally amazing that Sony saved it for us. They saved it so we could have that experience together. And to have even a little bit more of a little rabbit trail here, that's what makes the theater experience special. If you watch this movie for the first time, sitting at home by yourself, you'd still have fun with it. You'd still love seeing everybody literally wiping tears away from my eyes while filming a video. That's what a weird day. a good day, but a weird day. If you watch that at home, it'd be great to see him. It's not the same thing as experiencing that with a room full of people that are just as excited as you. It's not the same thing. To just feel like all of us know how much these characters meant to us and having a shared experience. I'm never going to forget when I saw this movie. Next, if I make a video about my favorite movie theater experiences, I mean, this is now easily in the top 3, maybe number 1. This is number 1 right here, last night. That experience, being in that room, as people jumped up and cheered and shouted that they were back. And you don't get that if you watch a movie at home. There's something special about a shared experience with other people. And that knowing that I'm not in this alone, like we all love this together. That's cool. And in that global sense, I wasn't in the theater with you, most of you. A few of you actually were there, since I was at kind of the fan meetup there. So a few of you watching these probably were in the theater with me. Most of you weren't, but in another sense you were. You felt the same thing that I did when I saw that movie last night. That's cool. That's shared experience. But when you're there in a room and you have it, there's something distinctly unique about that. Anyway, lingering about that. Gotta keep going. I have no idea how long this video is, but it's much too long already. They show up and it's so fun to just see them being quirky, weird, different, and their own versions of Peter Parker, but together. And when you have the contrast of them next to each other, you start to really realize just, how goofy Tobey Maguire's version was and how kind of cool but awkward Andrew Garfield's version was. And seeing all that play out was so fun. And all the moments where they say the same line about keeping their identity and all this stuff where they have the same sense of humor, but it plays out in a different way. It was exactly what I wanted it to be. It was exactly as satisfying as I wanted it to be, just as cool as I wanted it to be. They actually pulled it off, bringing Spider-Man together and finding a way to make the tone work. So Ned and MJ mention that their Peter Parker is in trouble. They go to him. And once again, we linger on the pain that Peter Parker is feeling over the loss. And our Spider-Man tried to connect with him in his first reaction. Don't. And there's a sense in which, when sometimes one of the worst things you can do when someone's in pain is to immediately try and relate to them. The most natural thing that we normally try to do when we're trying to comfort someone is relate to them through our own story. Say, well, I had something like this happen to me. And if you don't have a good point of connection for that, it's normally not received well. If someone says they lost something and you try to connect with it with something much less than what they lost, it backfires on you. It doesn't play well. And so you have this moment where you can see that they don't want to push him away. Like they're trying to respect the fact that he's processing something, but they also know that they do know what he feels. And so he says, like, you don't know what I feel like. She's dead because of me. And this is where I didn't even piece it together. I was like, okay, they're doing kind of the Aunt May and as Uncle Ben. Like you kind of saw that early on, but this is the sequence where it really, really starts to make it clear that this is very, very much where he's starting to get his Spider-Man story. That part of the Spider-Man journey of becoming Spider-Man is losing someone and believing it's your fault. Feeling the ownership of, with great power comes great responsibility. And so he has that moment. And that's where they realize, that's where they connect with him. Each of them, Uncle Ben, Gwen, and even Andrew Garfield also lost an Uncle Ben in the same fashion. And they start to soften him up and connect with him. And even in the moment where she died for nothing. And then later on, he says, she told me with great power. And then Toby finishes with comes great responsibility. And using that as the point by which to connect with and be like, she didn't die for nothing. Like, she died for this so that you could get this. Like, she died for something she believed in that she also believes in for you, that you can continue. And it clicks in his brain. And that's part of that Spider-Man mythos that I think had been missing from Tom Holland's version that's now there, making him a much better version of Spider-Man, to where, as I said before, his first 2 movies were good high school movie, good MCU superhero movie, fun, lighthearted, charming characters. This back half is where you get a great Spider-Man movie, a great Spider-Man story. And it really, you get that in this sequence. They decide to team up to try and cure our villains. So they head back to the lab to start working on everything. And this was another one of these sequences I just thought was a ton of fun, seeing them work together, and that the movie knew this is exactly what we wanted. This is what we bought a ticket for, was this. This was the payoff of the promise of the premise. It's not even the action and the spectacle. It's these interactions. And so the movie has all these little moments that in most movies you'd cut out. Like, you don't need to have this little bit here. You don't need to have this little joke right here. But for this specific movie, it's exactly what we want. So you see working together and having different knowledge sets. And so they show up and they're like, how are we going to heal Kurt Connors the lizard? Andrew Garfield's like, oh, that's easy. That's a cinch. I got that. And everything else has been, the movie's been a struggle. We got to figure it out. And he just says, I got that. And they look at him like they don't believe him. He's like, no, I got it. It's cool. It's done. I got it. And it lingers on it a little bit too long, but too long in the right sense of just like, you're like, oh yeah, that's right. He already did that. Like, okay, now that he's here, that's easy. That's already resolved. And even kind of the broken formula for the Green Goblin, they're like, Tobey Maguire's like, I've been thinking about that. I can do that. And you can see Tom Holland's like, but I want to kill him. I don't want to cure him. I want to kill him. He's like, for everyone. And just all these little moments. Ned asking Tobey Maguire, like, hey, do you have a best friend? Like, yeah, he died in my arms after he tried to kill me. Sets up, and it lingers on this moment as Ned's like, let that soak in just a little bit. And then it, pays off that moment a little bit later where Ned's like, hey, I'm a magician now too. I'm a sorcerer now too. I can do magic. Really? You can do magic? That's amazing. And he goes, I'm not going to try and kill you. Great payoff to the setup earlier. And then just that tagged on little bit of Andrew Garfield, like tapping on the shoulder, like, good job. Nailed that moment. Just all that stuff. It's just so fun to see these characters, their banter, their interactions, and their different experiences, their different information that they have from their different universes, and figuring all that out, like where they linger for a little bit, where they realize like, wait, you don't have web shooters? It just shoots out of you. Like, yeah. And they're fascinated by this, and they ask all these uncomfortable questions, and it's perfectly awkward as they do all of that. So just really, really nice stuff. And also setting up some of it, allowing heartfelt moments about Andrew Garfield, the loss of Gwen and what that's meant for him, but setting up a moment later on in the actual final battle. So there's not a ton to talk about here, except it was just great to have this stuff. And from there, let's kind of move into our final battle. And so they show up at the Statue of Liberty, which is being renovated to add Captain America's shield, which is kind of funny. And there's a nice detail that in this week's episode of Hawkeye, and if you haven't seen, this isn't a spoiler, but a throwaway line of dialogue in it is someone says, you should go see the new Statue of Liberty. And they say that in Hawkeye, which takes place like a year after this, because it's supposed to be 2 years after Endgame, and No Way Home is like 1 year after Endgame. And so you should go see the new Statue of Liberty. And that's a reference to what's taking place in this film. And there's also like little in the movie, you can see Rogers the Musical, which is in Hawkeye, and you see that in New York. And this is like little details like that just make it the universe feel thought out and like they tie together. But so they go to the Statue of Liberty, tell all the villains where they're going to be at. And the villains want to get this box so that MJ can't push the button. And there's a lot of stuff in this where you start to feel like there's the plot itself is pretty flimsy here of like, clearly this is a trap. The villains show up, walk right into it. Clearly this is a trap. If they thought about it for a second, why else would they be doing anything? It's a trap. But that's not what we came for the fan servicey stuff, and the fan servicey stuff really works, and the character arcs work. Plot itself kind of flimsy if you stop and think about almost any of the plot elements in this film. But so the villains are going to come, and so we're trying to set all this stuff up. And once again, we're at the point in time where we're building tension for a showdown, and it pauses to have Peter Parker snap Peter Parker's back. And it lingers on. I got lower back, middle back pain. Man, it's a problem if you could pop my back. Lingers on it. That's the sort of thing. Any other movie, you'd cut that. Like, what? Right now we're supposed to build urgency, pacing. What are you doing? Pausing to crack someone's back. But for this one movie, it is absolutely worth it to slow down for a second and have that. It leaves all of those little moments in. Actually, maybe there's more. Maybe we'll get an extended Blu-ray with 30 more minutes of this stuff. Just love those little details. Likewise, the fight breaks out and it pauses after they've been messing up and they're trying to work on teamwork. And we're in the middle of a fight. And we pause to this little gag where Tom Holland goes, hey, I don't want to brag or anything, but in my world, I'm an Avenger. I'm an Avenger here. And everyone's like, Toby goes, that's great. What's an Avenger? Is that a band? And it pauses for this little gag right here. Any other movie, any other moment, that would not be cool. But for this one, that is exactly the little stuff that we want. So we get this big, gigantic fight where they're trying to lure everyone there. They've got all these cures and they're trying to one by one figure out how to cure them. And so all sorts of shenanigans taking place. They start curing a couple of them. And they once again kind of come up with like contrived scenarios in this of like the way they got there was through Ned doing a portal, but he doesn't know how to close it because he doesn't actually know how to do this stuff. And so the portal's open. Once again, like kind of flimsy things. If you start thinking about the logic, it's like really like they used a portal, didn't know how to close it. And that this feels like you did this writing because you just needed to set up a scenario because you wanted MJ to end up being there so that she could fall so that Andrew Garfield could catch. Like there's several things like that in this that just feel like if you stop and think about it, you can find holes in this plot quite quickly of the logic of it all. But yeah, lots of fighting spectacle. We get the shot in there that was in the trailer that one of the trailers that they show Lizard like getting kicked, but they CGI'd out Spider-Man. So you just see him getting kicked by nothing. And as it turns out, yeah, that was Andrew Garfield doing that. And so you get all that fun stuff. And when after they've done a little Avengers talk and they start teaming together and they do like the jumping off the building together, swinging around and landing, theater went nuts, bananas. And we've already spent all this time with them, but all three of them in shot together, Matt's gone, just going crazy whenever that happened. And so that, yeah, scenario starts to play out of, I don't remember the exact order, and it doesn't matter too much, but you get that moment where Lizard is chasing MJ and she falls off. Tom Holland jumps for it. It was in the trailer, and so you knew they were probably going to do something with this. And some of us suspected if Andrew's in it, he's the one that catches her. He's trying to reach her, and he can't. So Andrew, because Green Goblin grabbed him, so Andrew Garfield jumps off and catches her. And afterwards, like he pauses there to he's crying over this moment. And she didn't die, and she's kind of nervous, but to him, that moment means something entirely different to her. I wish this sequence, they paused on it a bit more. Because it happens and it has all the right beats to it, but it happens in a way that it's like she falls and he catches her and then he's emotional. But it doesn't have the intricacy of some of the other sequences were paused. And this is one that is powerful no matter what when you do it. But I think it could have even been more powerful because of what that means to him. And if you really linger on it, key theme of this one, I think it could have been even better. I think it needed to be a little bit longer to fully get the oomph that was possible from that moment. But still a great moment, great with what they did with it. I guess the other thing in this is that Green Goblin shows up, Dr. Octopus. Electro, so that's the way it plays out. Electro is toasting everything. Dr. Octopus shows up, grabs two Spider-Men, and then while Electro's distracted, grabs the deal off of his chest, and he's still good. He's still on our side, and he's become a hero. He's a superhero now. That he's just one of the good guys, and while he was away, so that we didn't, so our Spider-Man interacting, he's been finishing the tech so it goes faster, so he just slams the steel to his chest and goes real quick, sucks the energy out of him. So he was up to something, but they he got his time in the middle act. So then in the third act, we want to spend all that time with our Spider-Man. So he was off developing this tech. And so it set everything up nicely so you know the rules of what's going on. So he puts that thing in his chest and you just see it go real quick. You understand it because earlier it lingered so long on doot, doot. And then we're one away and he takes it off. So this time he puts it on there real quick and you know exactly what happened. But Green Goblin shows up and ends up nuking the box, shattering the universe here. And so we got big, gigantic problems. It's a fun little moment in here, too. There's just a lot of things happening. I don't remember the exact timeline, where Doctor Strange finally shows up and they're like, Peter's doing it. I know you're mad. I know you're mad. Peter did it. He was successful. And Ned's like, oh, I also opened a portal. And Doctor Strange's like, you opened a portal? And just when it's Doctor Strange, someone that arrogant, someone that pompous, someone that accomplished, someone that intelligent, someone that powerful, and he just goes, that means so much more than high praise from your average Joe if you get Doctor Strange to give you just a nice little moment. But anyway, so box gets blown up. Eventually, Tom Holland and Doctor Strange is up on the top trying to pull the universe together. And then Tom Holland finds Green Goblin and he's just beating the crap out of him. Green Goblin's like, you didn't even have the courage to send us back to die. He's like, I didn't want to send you back to die. I want to kill you. Just driven, seeing red in this moment of just trying to take this guy out in this moment of everything that he's done. And he's blown up the box and he's caused all this. This guy's going to pay for what he's done. And you see him just wailing on him. And Tobey Maguire and Andrew see him and like, know that this can't play out. So, and Peter picks up the glider to like stab him to kill him. And Tobey Maguire catches it and holds him back. And it's just like you're seeing their eyes of like their reactions in their faces, the little twitches. You communicate everything of like, don't do it. Don't do it. Hey, I get it. I get why you want to kill him. I get why you're angry. I know why you're doing this. It won't give you what you want. And it takes something away. Don't do it. Don't. And you just little eyes communicates everything. And you see Tom Holland back off from it. It's like, snaps out of his rage. He's seeing red. And then you just hear, and the face on Tobey Maguire. This moment like, oh no, are they really going to do this? Is it really going to die? Collapses down. And then Andrew Garfield throws the cure to Tom, stabs it into the neck. And in this moment we're like, oh man, are they about to kill off Tobey Maguire? And like, oh, is he going to die because Tom Holland was trying to kill this guy and he died saving Spider-Man from himself and saving Norman Osborn? And they start to play it a little bit more for jokes afterwards. Like they just wanted to have that moment where you felt that dread in your gut. But it's not a movie where you need to do that. It's not a movie. There's nothing you gain in the character arc by having Tom Holland lose from two different people dying. And I think that's where they knew, like, let's do that to like mess with people. Like there's a cost to what this is doing. The cost doesn't need to be the death of Toby. That doesn't have a meaning, a purpose to it at this point in time in the story. So they end up playing it for laughs. So like, I've been stabbed before. And then he's looking up at the sky that's tearing apart. And he's like, is that really happening or am I dying? Like a lot of fun little moments like that, all sprinkled throughout all this with their little dialogue. And so then, Tom goes and talks to Doctor Strange. They realize what's happening. And Peter proposes, like, just make it so that nobody knows who I am. Forgets who Peter Parker is. Just forget Peter Parker. And they decide to do this. It means that Peter Parker's entire life is going to be reset. Basically, no one will know who he is. And I think it is like, I'm not sure if it's this the same spell, you've put parameters on this? I'm not going to say anything, but only people remember Peter Parker were the people that know also who Spider-Man was before. Could you put those parameters on it or something like that? I don't know. It seems like the nature of the magic is intentionally ambiguous so that it does what the plot needs. Even the idea of removing people's memories and Peter Parker, things like that. Like there's pictures and video and the entire plot line of your life revolves around knowing someone. So if you just forget them, what fills in the gaps of the story of the plot? You can spend a lot of time thinking about how magic works. The movie isn't interested in doing that. But so he's going to cast a spell so no one's going to remember him. So he kind of goes on his say goodbye tour and says bye to his friends. And like, they're not going to remember, but I'll find you. Like, well, I'll find you. If this is real, then I'll find you and we'll reconnect. You get a final moment with the Spider-Man. Oh, I forgot about in the middle of the fight. Andrew Garfield goes, I love you guys. And they're like, you awkwardly respond to him. You get a hug from all of them. And it's even as there was like the final hug between everyone, my crowd was going nuts. Just seeing them together hugging made everyone go bananas in my theater. And then even have a final moment with Doctor Strange where, you know, he feels sad of like, it's been really nice knowing you. I'm sorry to lose you from my life. And some of that's in, I think that even that moment that the mountain here, he realizes the loss of what's going to happen here so much more so than he seemed to show earlier in the movie when he was like, yeah, I'll just go erase you from my memory. What? That's why I lingered on my frustrations with it, because it just felt, compared to everything else, like they didn't put much thought into it the way they put thought into all of this third act stuff. So they cast the spell. Peter Parker is all alone. So this sends us off into kind of the little epilogue of the film where Peter, no one knows who he is. And so he goes and sees MJ and Ned. And it seems like he's trying to decide what he's supposed to do. And should he tell them? Should he just say it? Here's who I am and what I am, and we knew each other in this. Or do I just let's play out organically? And as he interacts with them and sees how free from concern they are, and they're just enjoying their life without the stress of his life, decides I'm not going to put that burden on them again. I'm going to talk with them. I'm going to interact with them. I want to be their friend, but I'm not going to once again make them carry this burden that I'm supposed to carry. Part of the journey of Spider-Man is learning that he has to carry the burden and try and protect the people that he loves from his burden. Then he goes to Aunt May's grave and Happy walks up. Happy doesn't know who he is anymore. And you see them interacting and chatting. And it's just a real nice little moment, poignant moment between the two of them, that one of them doesn't know who the other is anymore. But it doesn't change that they have that shared experience with Aunt May, even though one of them doesn't understand even the fullness of what that means. And just something special about that, just having that little epilogue of what these characters really meant to each other and not needing to have a joke. Allowing Happy not to be the butt end of a joke, a setup for how he's stupid, but he's someone that really does care about people. And that, I mean, Happy goes all the way back to Iron Man, which isn't like, that's not profound. Obviously, he's in the first Iron Man and he directed the first Iron Man. But you can forget because he's been in it for so long and kind of these side roles as not a lead character, but he has been that guy that's been so close to these core characters of the MCU, and he really cares about them. He's meant as a comedic relief, but he really cares about people. And those that he loves deeply and is very loyal and protective of them. That's just a sweet little note. And then it just kind of closes out with him in his new apartment. I wonder if they debated getting Rent Guy or trying to do the Rent Guy, because you hear the guy, the rent is due, and you're in a Spider-Man movie and someone says rent is due, your brain goes to Rent Guy. I wonder if they wanted to do that or had set that up or were going to do something with Rent Guy there, did one more cameo, and they just went, we can't break the tension. At this moment, it's not the right time for a joke. We're showing he is Spider-Man on his own, accepting his destiny as a hero and owning the costs that come with that. He carries the burden now. And it's not the right moment, even though it would be a great little joke right there if they found a way to do something with Rent Guy or Rent Guy's daughter or something right there. It was like set up perfectly to have one more joke. And I don't know if I'm glad they didn't or if I wish they did, but it was set up to do it. He goes into his apartment and you see him kind of all alone. He has these little things to remind him of the people he cares about, reminds him of his past. Palpatine, the coffee cup. And then he's looking at a radio scanner. And he's trying to find crimes being committed. And he's got his sewing kit, and it's back to the good old days of him by himself, without all the tech, all the fancy stuff, trying to be a hero. And it ends with him swinging off in the Big Apple. And that's one of the criticisms I've had, is that they've avoided having him in the Big Apple in He's been in the suburbs. He's been in space. He's been in Europe, Washington, D.C. Here he's in the multiverse. We haven't seen him in the classic imagery. And even the way this movie ends makes me a little bit more okay with the fact that they didn't do that. Because as to what I've even said here, that this movie really contains the origin story for the Spider-Man that I want, or have wanted, that I feel is missing. They set it up that it's coming in the near future, and just that it made me okay with what they've not done in the past. All right, real quick, I got to finish up on the post-credit scenes because my battery's about to die. First one, it's a little Venom bit. I thought it was funny. It was cute. It was pretty disappointing, though, that they set up Venom hopping into the MCU only to do another post-credit scene where he's gone. That, like, all the things to do, it's like, okay, you have the tease at the end, the symbiote, little pieces left behind, setting up whatever's going to happen with that next. Okay, cool. But you brought Venom into the MCU only to take him out with all him doing is sitting at a bar, drinking, learning about the MCU. Come on. I actually had a guy in my theater, as soon as he flashed back to his universe, goes, "We've been bamboozled." A guy yelled that, and then you see the symbiote on the little bar there, and the guy yells out a curse word like, "Oh," just shouts it because he was so excited about that little moment. But I wish they had done a little bit more, something different with that. Then we get at the end of it a trailer for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. That movie looks cool. I've been wanting more Doctor Strange, like focus on Doctor Strange. I loved what they did with Doctor Strange and What If. And that trailer says that they were doing, like, how much this movie is a follow-up to WandaVision and What If. And maybe this movie too. I guess this movie is supposed to come out before Far From Home or No Way Home. So I don't even know how that's going to play out. But man, I can't wait for this movie. Sam Raimi returning to Marvel. More Doctor Strange. Wanda with Doctor Strange. And two Doctor Strange. Man, I am so excited about all of that stuff. And I love that they did that a full trailer is a post-credit scene that wasn't on the internet beforehand. Well played, Marvel. All right, closing this out, maybe I'll get cut off by my battery dying from this ridiculously long video, but even as I was talking about it, it made me love all the parts of this movie that I loved even more, and more frustrated by the stuff that didn't work for me. That so much of it was so well thought out, so heartfelt, so emotional, so set up and paid off so well, that the stuff that just felt like they just went for it with the cheapest reason. Saying they're impulsive, saying that he's arrogant, that's why it feels cheap and lazy, because it's like, oh yeah, he's impulsive. So we can justify him doing any impulsive thing. That feels cheap to me. That feels lazy to me. There's not more justifying it. But everything about the back half of this film, you saw, like, I was getting teared up talking about it. It was that good. It's finally the Spider-Man story that Tom Holland has needed. Filled out his character arc, gave him a full origin story while having some fan service on the same level as Endgame. And in its own ways, better than Endgame, because we never thought we'd see these characters in these parts before. So, man, I'm still so torn on how I feel about this movie. Let me know what you thought down below. Thank you guys for tuning into this full, gigantic, long video. You can check out my other Spider-Man reviews right over there. My Spider-Man rankings right down there. And I'm coming back tomorrow and over the next few days with more Spider-Man rankings, updated Spider-Man rankings with No Way Home thrown into the mix. Thank you so much for watching, and I don't know what I was about to do. Keep talking movies too much.